Hi, Macedonia family. It's Wednesday again. For those of you who are still trying to keep track of the days on the calendar and maintain some semblance of normalcy, that'll give you a kind of a point in time. I know for me, certainly having services on Sunday morning at the drive-in, if you will, has been immensely helpful. Just because it lets me know when Sunday is again. I was getting turned around a bit, I'd say, having trouble knowing even what day it was. So it's nice to have that guidepost in the week, but even more so, and for me, I get to see more of you than some of you get to see of each other because you're in your cars, obviously. But it is nice to see everyone, and it's really wonderful to have that back in the week. So I'm looking forward to being able to continue that, and excited that we have the opportunity to do that. So, but as we go through this time and through our isolation, I find myself, obviously a little stir crazy like everyone else, but with time to think about some things, and it's fascinating to look around and to see what's going on in the world around us and how different people react. And I hope that you and I hope that I am reacting and responding in a very Christ-like way, and that those around us see that there's a hope in us, that we are not exhibiting a spirit of fear. It's one thing to be concerned. I've learned this recently over the last few months, that there is a significant difference between fear, uh, anxiety, worry, and concern. It's okay to be concerned. That's concern is what makes us plan and think about things logically and kind of have an idea about what the future holds. But there's a very different side of things when you cross over into fear or worry. And for us as Christians, not only does it cause us heartache, and in fact can cause other physical problems, that lost sleep, and which then leads to you're tired all the time, so a number of things like that. But it damages our witness, and it affects how other people see us and in turn see Christ. Not that we do these things for the world, or that we control our fear for the world, but that we always remember that we are a living temple and a testimony, and our life can testify. So more so than our worry detracting from our witness, we should think about how our confidence and the boldness that we have in Christ contributes to our witness and opens doors. You see opportunities as I think we come out of this, that people will wonder at the hope that you have, or at the confidence, or the joy that is in you. And that's all the more reason for us to rejoice, because nothing that has happened is a risk to our souls. God still has us firmly in his grasp, and we cannot be torn from his grasp. He will not lose us because we belong to him. So that's just some I think really good words of encouragement. But we have to keep in mind that, and there are some in our church who live alone and who have not been around people for anyone, even people in their household, for a while now. And loneliness starts to get to us. And I've commented a few times, and I will continue to recommend that everyone call others in the church, call others that aren't in the church, reach out to people who certainly may be alone and may need a friend to talk to. It's amazing how much that helps people get through the day when they just simply get a phone call or a letter, or you call to check on them. And I wanted to share something I found. It said, and this is actually an interesting statistics from 1991, so we're talking almost 30 years ago. I feel really old all of a sudden. And yes, some of you were laughing that I said that. But at that time, it said nearly 22% of people last night, relatively speaking, ate alone. And 1/4 of our nation experiences regular levels of isolation and loneliness. If it was 22% in 1991, I would absolutely tell you that it has got to be far higher than that. We have our society and our culture is the most connected, lonely place to be that I've ever seen or can imagine. We are incredibly connected to an overwhelming point, and yet we are completely alone in a crowd. We can, and it's the devices, it's the social media, and all of those things that wonderful tools, and we're grateful for right now. But it's also the personal connection that we're lacking. And so I would tell you that today, I'm sure more people, before this happened, even more people were lonely, and now this is only exacerbating that. There are people who probably are somewhat better in this, but even the minimal social interaction or physical presence people were getting before is now not there in some respects. And I know many of us are hurting because we can't gather at church or on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, or any other event that we've had. So many things have been canceled and that we're missing out on. But there's a quote here from Mother Teresa, which is, she worked with orphans and widows and took care of them, and one of the things that she has a fascinating perspective here. The most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted. And that's for someone who has worked with poverty their entire life. She had a good perspective on poverty. And that's fascinating to hear her say that the worst poverty is loneliness. But also think about that, the feeling of being unwanted, and how there are people now who may feel more unwanted than ever. And so that's troubling. And to turn that then into what I wanted to talk about tonight is Jonah chapter 2. And Jonah very much was in a situation where he was facing the unknown. We read at the end of chapter 1 in verse 17 of Jonah, it says, the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. And so here we start off with him in the belly of a fish. And it says, and Jonah was in the stomach of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. We look at that and we think, oh, okay, that's 3 days and 3 nights, and sounds like a like a getaway. And I'm sure being in the belly of the fish was no luxury vacation. We don't know what that was like. If you look at the pictures that we see from kids' books or whatever, you see this big, empty, cavernous stomach, and or inside, and you see the ribs, and he's standing on the tongue or floating on some boards or whatever that looks like. We have no idea, but it's made out to be in the kids' books like it doesn't look too awful. You think being in the stomach of a fish is an awful thing. It was. That's the thing. When you really think about it, what does that look like to be in the stomach of a fish? And you can find on the internet, you can find pictures of people who have been swallowed by snakes or crocodiles or whatever, and they cut them open and find typically what's left. And in no way, shape, or form does that ever look like a comfortable position to be in. So not only are you in the belly of some creature that swallowed you, that you are expecting to be digested by, but you have whatever else is in there, and you're packed in and cramped. So I just want to set the stage there that there is no way that this was a great experience for Jonah. We know it was 3 days and 3 nights, but think about that. He's swallowed by a fish. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He doesn't yet know that he is going to be saved. He doesn't know God's plan. In fact, we'll see that it's not until after he is back up on dry land that he is approached again by God, and the word of the Lord comes to him and gives him instructions again. So in the entirety of chapter 2, we really have what amounts to the testimony of Jonah about his prayer and his experience in the whale, and it's told in hindsight. So it's a bit of a misconception, or it's misconstrued about what his experience was like in that case. So think about that and keep that in mind. This isn't really a fun tale when you think about it. And I intend to make that point. I don't make it overly gloomy, but it is, I want to think about this in a way that we normally don't, which is we normally think of it as kind of as a happy little kid's tale about the guy that was swallowed by a fish and spit up and then he obeyed God, but there's more to it. So in chapter 2, starting with the first few verses here, then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the stomach of the fish. And he said, I called out of my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I cried for help from the depths of Sheol. You heard my voice. For you had cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the current engulfed me. All your breakers and billows passed over me. So I said, I have been expelled from your sight. Nevertheless, I will look forward toward your holy temple. Water encompassed me to the point of death. The great deep engulfed me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I descended to the roots of the mountains. The earth with its bars was around me forever. But you have brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. And I'm going to stop there at the end of verse 6. And it's actually in middle point in verse 6, we transition over, and he goes from praying to God in his distress, and the kind of talking about the situation he was in, which is pretty dire, to here we have, but he said, but you have brought up my life from the pit. And he was done for. And you think about that, he's trying to get away from God. He's had potentially even these sailors throw him into the sea in order to not do what God has called him to do. So when he's swallowed by a fish, it's just another turn of events. And he finally, something strikes a chord with him, and he says, and Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the stomach of the fish. So it wasn't while he was drowning. It wasn't while they were throwing him into the water. The fish swallowed him, and he started to pray. And he said God answered him by the events that occurred. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know how long he's going to be there. But 3 days and 3 nights is a long time when you're stuck. Many people don't like claustrophobia. You don't like to be in confined spaces. Even those of us who don't have claustrophobia love to be out in the wide open spaces. We like our space and our freedom. And right now we are very constrained in what we can do. We may not be in the belly of a whale, but we are far more restricted than we have ever been for the most part in our entire lives. Not being able to go wherever we want is not only affecting how we travel and how we interact with others, but it's affecting us mentally and emotionally, and and ultimately physically, because we're not getting out like we used to. Potentially, we don't have the interaction that we used to. We're hungry for that. We're social people. We're not made to be alone. God, in Genesis, it's not good for man to be alone. So we are social creatures, and we're made to be social and interact and be out and about. So if you think of it that way, in some respects, we are in the belly of a whale right now, and many of us are praying to be freed from that. And in the same way, in our lives, circumstances can do this to us, and sin can do this to us. We can get bound by sin. Sin can make a stronghold in our life and it can trip us up, and it can cause us to be limited in what we can do. We may be limited in our witness and our testimony because we are constrained by sin. Many people, and I've been in this boat before, where I felt because of the sin in my life in the past, even, not current sin, but in the past, who I had been precluded me from serving God. And that was, ironically, it was very arrogant of me to think that my past was greater than what God could do through me. And so, you think about that. Being in the belly of a whale not only represents a physical constraint, but can be spiritual and emotional and mental as well. But Jonah was in this situation, and in verse 7 we pick it up, and there's just a few more verses here. It's a pretty short chapter, but we see him pivot at least in respect to how he's talking about God. He says in verse 7, "While I was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who regard vain idols forsake their faithfulness, but I will sacrifice to you with a voice of thanksgiving. That which I have vowed I will pay. Salvation is from the Lord." And I'm going to stop in verse 9, because verse 10 we start to transition over to the next verse. But he isn't necessarily repenting here, at least the way I read it. What I see is, it seems far more he is regretting his choices, and he's saying that, I will keep my vows. It's interesting because he actually mentions, "But I will sacrifice to you with a voice of thanksgiving, that which I have vowed I will pay." I wonder if in the belly of the whale, Jonah didn't do what some of us do at times, and promise God that if he would save him, he would change his ways. I don't know what specifically he was praying for or praying about. I can imagine, aside from the fear of death, the thought of being slowly digested by a fish can't be a pleasant thought. And so he may have simply been asking the Lord to save him in some way, and that he would follow him. But either way, at the end of this, we see in verse 10, "Then the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah up onto the dry land." And as I read this the first time, I thought about this and was thinking, kind of with a chuckle, that some of us have gotten to the point where we wouldn't mind being vomited up in order to be out of this situation. There are people who are, in some cases, taking some risks that, of getting the virus or whatever else may happen, in order to be around other people. And some people are forced to by their circumstances. So, we have, people who, even in our own church, in our own body, are in a situation where their lives are put at risk, because of what they do. But they also have their lives at risk every day. I don't make light of it at all, the situation people are in, but many of the people who are at risk now are at risk all the time. And we should appreciate them all the time. Just in the same way we appreciate our soldiers at certain times, and especially when there's a conflict going on. But their sacrifice is no different when in peacetime, necessarily, than at any other time. In the same way with doctors and nurses and first responders and firemen and all those who save lives and look out for those who are ill. But at this point in the story, Jonah now has been vomited up on dry land, which I can't imagine could be pleasant, but it's got to be better than being in the stomach of a fish. And he's probably now trying to figure out what's next. And next week, we'll talk about what's next, because God is going to approach Jonah again. And we think, what would that be like? And we think of Jonah as a prophet and as potentially a man of God. I'm going to spoil a little bit here. He is a bit of a whiner, and he really enjoys his sour grapes. So we'll talk about that next week. But feel free to read ahead, read chapter 3, see what you think of chapter 3 and how Jonah obeys God after this. But again, there will come a time when we get out of the belly of our own whale. I'm watching it outside right now. It's pouring down rain, and it's gray and dreary, and we've had a few days like that. But I know the sun will come, and the sunrise will come, and we'll have beautiful days ahead. And the same will happen socially and emotionally and everything else once we're out of this situation, and we can gather again and fellowship together and be able to enjoy the presence of others like we used to. Things are probably never going to be the same. Everybody will be changed by this, but we have an opportunity, and lives will be changed. Ears are open, hearts are open, people are open to things that they've not been open to before, and we need to be ready to speak of the hope that we have in us. So I'm praying for you. I hope you all have a blessed evening and stay safe, and I will see you soon.